The skyline of Manhattan at 5 a.m. looks like a jagged crown of cold diamonds, and from the 68th floor penthouse of the Thorne Pentagon building, I owned every single one of them. I am Sloane Thorne. At 36, I don't just manage money, I command it. As the CEO of Black Standard Capital, I oversee a hedge fund that moves markets with a whisper. My life is a symphony of precision, high-frequency trading and absolute silence. But at 5:05 a.m. on a random Tuesday, that silence was shattered by a vibration on my nightstand that didn't belong to a client. It was my sister, Skylar. I stared at the glowing screen. Skylar didn't wake up before noon unless there was a sale at Hermes or a crisis of her own making. I swiped open the message. Sloane, don't be a bitch and ignore this. Jax made a tactical adjustment in the offshore oil sector that went south. Well beyond south. The market wiped him out. We owe a private equity group $50 million by Friday, or they're going to start seizing the brand assets. I need you to wire $10 million to the attached routing number today to bridge us. Also, we're quitting our current management firm. You'll be taking care of our monthly overhead until we pivot. It's only $500,000 a month. That's couch change for you. Call me. I read the text twice. Not because I was confused, but because I was marveling at the sheer, unadulterated audacity. Jax, her husband, was a former pro athlete whose only current professional skill was wearing $5,000 suits and spending my money while pretending to be a venture capitalist. He lived in a world of rented Ferraris and borrowed prestige. And Skylar, she was a socialite entrepreneur whose cosmetic line lost more money in a fiscal quarter than most small countries produced in a year. They weren't asking. They were demanding. They viewed my bank account as a communal well, and they had been lowering their buckets into it for years. I didn't call. I didn't even blink. I sat up, the 800 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets sliding off my skin like the old life I was about to shed. I walked to my floor-to-ceiling windows, looking down at the tiny ant like headlights of the city below. For 3 years, I had been the designated ATM for the Sterling family, the responsible daughter who cleaned up the spills, paid the hush money, and funded the delusions of grandeur that kept my parents' political legacy afloat. I picked up my personal phone. I typed 5 words: not my circus, not my monkeys. Then I opened my encrypted work laptop. Waiting in my inbox was the final execution version of an appointment letter. The board of directors for our London-based global conglomerate had been courting me for months. They wanted me as the global board chair. It came with a base of 8 figures, a private jet allowance that would make a rock star weep, and most importantly, an ocean of distance. I digitally signed the contract. The timestamp read 5:15 a.m. My departure for Heathrow was set for Monday. Exactly 15 minutes after I sent that text to Skylar, my phone erupted. It wasn't a text this time. It was a voice memo from my mother, Eleanor Sterling. Eleanor was the Grand Dame of Washington, D.C. Social circles, a woman who valued a family's reputation more than the family itself. I pressed play. Her voice, usually a practiced melodic purr, was now a shrill, vibrating weapon of guilt. Sloane. How dare you? I just got off the phone with your sister. She's hysterical. She's having a legitimate medical episode because of your cruelty. You are sitting in that glass tower, hoarding your bonuses like a common criminal, while your own flesh and blood faces social annihilation. Do you have any idea what this will do to your father's standing at the club, to our legacy? You will be at the Hamptons estate this Saturday for the gala. No excuses. We are having a family summit, and you will sign whatever documents Jax puts in front of you to fix this. Do not forget who gave you the name that opened those doors for you, Sloane. You are a Sterling first and a CEO second. Turn. I listened to the memo twice, a cold, dry chuckle escaping my throat. It was the same script they had used since I was 12. If Skylar failed a math test, it was my fault for not tutoring her. If Skylar crashed her convertible, I was expected to give her mine. "You're the strong one, Sloane," my father would say while adjusting his silk tie. "Be the bigger person. Support the family." Being the bigger person had cost me a marriage, my 20s, and approximately $40 million in loans that were never meant to be repaid. 3 years ago, when my father was facing a federal audit because he'd used campaign funds to renovate their Hamptons estate, I stepped in. I paid $20 million to clear the debt and bury the story. In exchange, I forced him to sign over the deed to their crown jewel, the $100 million Manhattan penthouse, and the Bel Air mansion Skylar currently occupied. At the time, I thought it was a safety net for them. Now I realized it was my leverage. I opened my private banking portal. My eyes flickered over the recurring transfers tab. Skylar/Jax. Lifestyle stipend. $250,000 per month. Status active. Bel Air estate maintenance/staff $75,000 per month status active. Gulfstream G 65. O. Fractional lease $120,000 per month. Status active. I was paying for the roof over their heads, the fuel in their jets, and the very caviar they choked on while calling me selfish. I clicked the first transfer, cancel. The second, cancel. The third, cancel. A warning box popped up. "Are you sure you want to terminate these authorizations? This action may result in immediate service disruption." I smiled. Disrupt away. I hit confirm. Just like that, the golden cord was severed. By next week, the staff would walk out of the Bel Air mansion. The jet would be grounded. The credit cards would start clicking like empty chambers in a revolver. I stood up, feeling a surge of adrenaline that no market trade could ever provide. I looked at the silver-framed photo on my desk, the four of them at the last Christmas gala, smiling pristine and utterly hollow. They wanted a family summit on Saturday. They wanted to ambush me in the Hamptons, surround me with their manufactured disappointment, and guilt-trip me into one last massive liquidation of my soul fine. I would give them a summit. I typed a brief reply to my mother. "I'll be there Saturday at 7. Have the scotch ready." I reached for my briefcase and tucked the signed London contract inside. This dinner wasn't going to be the bailout they were expecting. It was going to be an eviction. They thought they were the ones holding the crown, but they had forgotten who paid for the gold, the jewels, and the head it sat upon. Monday, I'd be in London. But Saturday, I was going to burn the kingdom down. The drive to the Hamptons was a 2-hour meditation on the death of duty. I sat in the back of my blacked-out Maybach, the silence of the cabin as thick as a tomb. On my lap sat a leather-bound folder. It didn't contain a check. It contained a reckoning. As we pulled through the wrought-iron gates of the Sterling estate, a sprawling, shingle-style fortress of old money illusions, I saw the cars. My father's vintage Mercedes, Skylar's lime green Lamborghini, undoubtedly purchased with the marketing budget I had just cut, and several black SUVs belonging to the private security that I was currently subsidizing. The house was lit up like a stage. That was Eleanor's specialty. If the world is ending, make sure the chandeliers are polished so the neighbors don't smell the rot. I stepped into the foyer, and the scent of expensive lilies and desperation hit me immediately. My mother appeared at the top of the grand staircase, her face a masterpiece of practiced grief. She didn't offer a hug. She offered a critique. "You're late, Sloane, and you're wearing black. It's a dinner, not a funeral." That depends on the guest of honor, mother," I replied, my heels clicking like a metronome against the white marble. I walked into the dining room. The table was set for a corporate execution. My father Sterling sat at the head, swirling a glass of neat scotch. Jax was to his right, leaning back with a smug, predatory grin that suggested he'd already spent the money he hadn't yet extorted from me. Skylar sat opposite him, her eyes red and puffy, a tactical display of vulnerability for the woman who once told me she'd never let a crisis ruin her eyeliner. "Sit," my father commanded. He didn't look at me. He looked at the folder in my hand. "We've had a difficult week, Sloane. Jax has explained the market volatility that has affected the family's liquidity." Market volatility. I pulled out my chair, the screech of wood against floor echoing in the tense room. "Is that what we're calling a $50 million bonfire now? Watch your tone, Sloane." Jax interjected, his voice dripping with faux brotherly concern. "I took a calculated risk to scale our influence. It's what visionary leaders do. Unfortunately, the institutional players rigged the game against us. It's a systemic issue. As a member of this family, your success is a byproduct of the Sterling name. We're just rebalancing the assets." "Rebalancing?" I leaned forward, the candlelight flickering in my cold eyes. "You want $10 million to bridge your incompetence and $500,000 a month to fund Skylar's creative retreats in St. Bart's. That's not a rebalance, Jax. That's a ransom." "Enough," Eleanor snapped, taking her seat. "We aren't here for a lecture on accounting. We are here to fix this. Sterling, tell her the plan." My father set his glass down with a heavy thud. "The private equity group Jax worked with is aggressive. They want their collateral. I've already spoken to our contacts at the bank. We're going to leverage the 401k holdings in Jaws and the trust residuals. But since you have the highest credit rating and the liquid reserves, we'll need you to co-sign the new bridge loan. It's a simple signature. Sloane. By the time you get back from whatever little business trip you're planning, it'll be handled." I looked at them, three people who hadn't worked a real day in their lives, staring at me as if I were a piece of fruit they were entitled to peel. "You want me to put my personal credit and my firm's reputation on the line for a man who couldn't manage a lemonade stand?" I asked quietly. "You're being incredibly selfish, Sloane." Skylar whimpered, dabbling her eyes with a silk napkin. "I have people depending on me. My brand is about to launch a new line. If the jet is repossessed, if the house goes dark, my followers will know. My life will be over. Do you want that? Do you want to be the reason I lose everything?" "You lost everything the moment you stopped realizing I was the one paying for it," I said. My father's face began to turn that shade of deep, dangerous crimson he reserved for uncooperative subordinates. "Don't get high and mighty with me. I made you. I gave you the connections that built Black Standard. You owe this family your life." "I paid that debt when I saved you from a federal indictment 2 years ago, Dad," I replied, opening my folder. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, the confirmation of the cancelled transfers. I slid it across the table. It landed in front of Jax like a death warrant. "The lifestyle stipend is dead. The maintenance for the Bel Air house is terminated. The jet lease is officially cancelled as of 5 o'clock this morning. You have 48 hours to vacate my property before the private security, whom I have also fired, escorts you to the curb." The silence that followed was absolute. Then the explosion. Skylar let out a jagged shriek. Jack stood up so fast his chair hit the floor with a deafening thud. "You bitch! You can't do that. That's my company's headquarters. It's a residential mansion I own, Jack's, not an office. And as for your company, the only thing you produce is debt." My father didn't stand. He didn't scream. He just stared at me with a cold, malicious smile that sent a shiver of genuine alarm down my spine. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his scotch. "You think you're so smart, Sloane," he whispered. "You think you've won because you have the keys to the kingdom. But you forgot one thing. I'm the one who designed the locks." He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a document. He didn't slide it. He held it up like a trophy. Do you remember the surgery you had 5 years ago? The complications you were under for 3 days? You signed a durable power of attorney, naming me as your primary representative for all financial and legal affairs in the event of your incapacity or emergency needs. That was 5 years ago, I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. I told you to destroy that. I revoked it verbally and in writing. Did you? Sterling laughed, a dry, rasping sound. Well, the paperwork seems to have stayed in my vault. And 3 days ago, given the emergency of your sister's financial crisis and your refusal to act, which I've framed as a mental breakdown due to overwork, I used that power of attorney. I secured a $100 million line of credit from a secondary lender. My breath hitched. That's illegal. That's identity theft. That's fraud. Is it? Sterling's eyes were like flint. The lender is an old friend. They didn't ask too many questions. I used your Manhattan penthouse and your personal investment portfolio as collateral. The money has already been moved to a blind trust under Jax's name. You're the primary borrower, Sloan. You're the one on the hook for the interest. If you try to fight this, I'll have you declared mentally unstable. I'll say the stress of the job has finally broken you and that you're having a manic episode. Hey. Eleanor leaned back, her face restored to its regal calm. We told you, dear. You are a Sterling first. And a Sterling always takes care of their own, even if we have to force you. I looked around the table. They weren't my family. They were a pack of wolves who had finally found the throat. They were willing to destroy my career, my sanity and my future just to keep their champagne cold. I stood up, my hands trembling, but I didn't let them see it. I grabbed my bag, my knuckles white against the leather. You think you've trapped me, I said, my voice vibrating with a cold, white-hot fury that felt like liquid nitrogen in my veins. You think you've won the crown. I walked toward the door, stopping only to look back at my father, who was already pouring himself another glass to celebrate his theft. But you've forgotten one thing, Sterling. When you steal from a queen, you don't just get the gold, you get the war. And I promise you, by the time I'm done, the name Sterling won't even be fit for a headstone. I walked out into the night, the heavy oak doors slamming behind me with the finality of a gavel. My mind was already moving, calculating, hunting. They wanted a fight. Fine. I wouldn't just take my money back. I was going to take their names, their legacy, and every last scrap of dignity they had left. The summit was over. The siege had begun. The interior of the Maybach felt like a war room. Outside, the lush, manicured hedges of the Hamptons blurred into a dark smear as we sped toward the city. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. In the world of high finance, emotion is a luxury that costs too much and yields nothing. I needed leverage, and I needed it before the sun rose over Wall Street. I opened my secure phone and dialed a number that wasn't in my contacts. It was memorized. Leo, I said when the line clicked open. It's Sloan. We have a code black. My father didn't just ask for a handout. He committed a felony. He used a revoked power of attorney to forge a $100 million line of credit against my Manhattan assets. He's funneled it into a blind trust for Jax. There was a pause on the other end. Leo Vance was the kind of attorney who made sharks look like goldfish. He had been my fixer for a decade, the man who knew where every body was buried because he usually held the shovel. Sloan, that's not just family drama. That's federal wire fraud, identity theft, and bank fraud. Leo's voice was a low, gravelly rasp. If he used a secondary lender, they're likely a shadow bank. They don't care about the law. They care about the collateral. If you don't move fast, they'll start liquidating your portfolio by Monday morning. I don't want to just stop the liquidation, Leo, I said, my voice as cold as the air conditioning. I want to dismantle him. I want to find out who notarized that document. I want the names of everyone at that lending firm. And I want to know exactly how much of that 100 million is already gone. I'll have a team on it in 20 minutes, Leo promised. But Sloane, if we go this route, there's no coming back. You're talking about putting your father in a jumpsuit that matches his orange tie. He made his choice when he tried to bury me alive, I replied. Now he gets to see how well I dig. I spent the rest of the drive in a fever of cold calculation. By the time I reached my penthouse, the one my father thought he now owned, I had a list. First, I reached out to my chief technology officer at Black Standard. Marcus, I need a complete digital sweep of my personal accounts. Look for any unauthorized authentication attempts from IP addresses in Greenwich or the Hamptons. And I want a geofence put on all my corporate assets. If anyone so much as whispers my name near a terminal, I want to know. Next, I sent a midnight email to the board of directors in London. I didn't mention the fraud. I simply informed them that I would be arriving 36 hours early and that I would be bringing a strategic restructuring proposal that would necessitate the immediate severance of all US-based political consulting contracts, specifically the one held by Sterling Thorne's firm. At 3 a.m., my doorbell rang. It was Leo carrying a thick manila folder and a look of grim satisfaction. "You were right about the notary," Leo said, dropping the folder on my kitchen island. "It wasn't a professional. It was Arthur Penhaligon, your father's old college roommate, and a sitting judge in the State Superior Court. He backdated the notarization to make it look like the POA was never revoked." "A judge," I whispered, a dark smile tugging at the corners of my mouth. "Sterling is getting sloppy. He's relying on old-school favors in a digital age." "It gets better," Leo continued. "The secondary lender is a shell company called Apex Horizon. I traced the ownership. It's a nested corporation based in the Cayman Islands, but the beneficial owner isn't just your father. It's Jax. The idiot used your stolen money to pay off the interest on a previous debt to a group of very unpleasant people in Eastern Europe. He didn't invest it, Sloane. He laundered it. I looked at the documents. It was all there. The forged signatures, the backdated stamps, the trail of dirty money flowing from my hard-earned success into the pockets of criminals. "They think they've trapped me in a legal labyrinth," I said, tracing the judge's signature with my fingernail. "But they've just handed me the keys to their prison cells." "What's the play?" Leo asked. "We go to the DA." "No," I said. "The DA is a political animal. My father helped get him elected. If we go to the DA, the evidence will mysteriously vanish. We go to the one place Sterling Thorne can't control, the Court of Public Opinion and the Federal Reserve's investigative arm. But first, I want to watch Skylar crumble." I took my phone and opened Instagram. Skylar had just posted a photo of herself in my Bel Air pool, a glass of champagne in her hand, and a caption that read, "Sometimes you just have to remind people who really holds the power. Hashtag family first. Hashtag unstoppable." I felt a surge of white-hot disgust. While I was working 90-hour weeks to build a legacy, she was playing dress-up in my life, funded by my sweat and now my stolen assets. I dialed the estate manager for the Bel Air property. "Richard," I said, "I know it's late, but I am exercising my right as the sole owner of the Bel Air estate. I want the locks changed by 6 a.m. I want the water and electricity shut off for emergency maintenance. And I want the security team to inform Mrs. Skylar Jackson that her presence is no longer required. If she resists, call the LAPD and report a trespasser. I have the deed and the termination of her residency agreement ready to be faxed." "But Miss Thorne," the manager stammered. "The family, though, your father said—" "My father doesn't sign your paycheck, Richard, I do. And if you're still on the premises at 6:05 a.m. without having completed those tasks, you can join her on the sidewalk." I hung up. By 8 a.m. my phone was a war zone of missed calls. First came Skylar, her voice a shrill, hysterical mess on my voicemail. Sloan, the police are here. They're throwing my clothes into the street. How could you do this? I have a photo shoot today. You're a monster. Dad is going to kill you. Then came my mother, Eleanor. Sloan, you have crossed a line that cannot be uncrossed. You have humiliated this family. I am calling the chairman of your board. I will make sure you never work in this town again. Schrittelt. Finally, the text from my father. Short, controlled, deadly. You think a few locks will stop me? I have your 100 million, Sloan. By Monday, I'll have your firm. You've played your hand. Now watch me overplay mine. I stood on my balcony watching the city wake up. The sun was hitting the glass of the skyscrapers, turning the world into a forest of gold. You haven't seen my hand yet. Sterling, I whispered to the wind. I picked up the folder and headed for the elevator. I had a 10 a.m. meeting with the head of the SEC's criminal division, an old mentor who hated my father's brand of politics almost as much as I did. The siege wasn't just beginning. The walls were already starting to fall, and I was the one holding the torch. The federal building in Lower Manhattan is a monolith of grey stone and cold bureaucracy, a place where legacies go to be dissected under fluorescent lights. At 10 o'clock a.m. sharp, reading through the metal detectors, my spine a rod of tempered steel. I wasn't here as a daughter, and I wasn't here as a victim. I was here as a predator. I was ushered into a private conference room on the 24th floor. Waiting for me was Special Agent Miller, a veteran of the SEC's criminal division, whose reputation for tenacity made him the most feared man in the financial district. He was also the man my father had tried to get fired 6 years ago for overstepping during a routine audit. Sloan Thorne, Miller said, not rising from his chair but gesturing for me to sit. I heard you were moving to London. I didn't expect to see you in my office on a Saturday morning. London can wait 48 hours, Agent Miller, I said, sliding the manila folder across the mahogany table. I believe you've been looking for a reason to reopen the file on Sterling Thorne and his associates. I'm here to give you the map, the key, and the smoking gun. Miller opened the folder. As he flipped through the bank statements, the backdated power of attorney and the shell company links to Apex Horizon, the room grew deathly quiet. I watched his eyes. When he reached the page containing Judge Penhaligon's forged notarization, he let out a long, low whistle. This is a federal bingo, Sloan, Miller whispered. Wire fraud, bank fraud, and judicial corruption. But you realize what this means. If we move on this, your assets, the ones they used as collateral, will be frozen for the duration of the investigation. You could be tied up in litigation for years. I've already liquidating my secondary holdings to cover my firm's operational costs, I replied, my voice devoid of emotion. I'm prepared to take the hit. What I'm not prepared to do is let a group of parasites use my life's work to fund a Ponzi scheme. I want the warrants served by Monday morning. Why Monday? Because Monday is when the Sterling family thinks they're going to finalize the seizure of my firm. I said, a dark glint in my eyes. And I want them to be wearing handcuffs when they realize the door is locked. I left the federal building feeling a strange sense of lightness. The bridge was burned. There was no going back to the Thorne they knew. By 2 p.m., the counteroffensive had shifted to the digital battlefield. As I predicted, Skylar wasn't going down quietly. She had taken to TikTok and Instagram, filming herself standing on the sidewalk in Bel Air, surrounded by Louis Vuitton luggage and crying crocodile tears for her 5 million followers. My own sister is a monster, she sobbed into the camera, the video already racking up 1 million views. She's using her corporate power to make me homeless because I wouldn't let her control my brand. She's mentally unstable, guys. My father is trying to get her help, but she's lashed out and stolen our family's legacy. Please, hashtag save Skylar, hashtag corporate evil. The comments were a vitriolic swarm. People were calling for a boycott of Black Standard Capital. My PR team was frantic, but I gave them a single instruction: do not engage, let her talk. The more she talked, the more she tied the noose. Every mention of family legacy and my father's help was further evidence of their coordination. At 6 p.m., I arrived at a nondescript luxury hotel midtown. I couldn't go back to my penthouse, not because I was afraid, but because I knew Sterling would have private investigators watching the lobby. I needed a ghost's vantage point. I opened my laptop and logged into the Sterling Strategic internal server, a backdoor I had installed years ago when I was fixing their IT infrastructure. I began to download the client list. It was worse than I thought. My father wasn't just using my money to pay off Jax's debts. He was using the Apex Horizon line of credit to pay off dividends to other high-profile investors in Jax's failed oil venture. It was a classic Ponzi pyramid, and I was the unwitting foundation. Among the investors were some of the most powerful names in DC and Wall Street. If this blew up, it wouldn't just be a family scandal, it would be a systemic explosion. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Jax. I hope you like the view from the street, Sloan. We just filed the emergency injunction. By Monday, the board will vote you out for gross incompetence and mental distress. We have the judge's signature. You're done. Last chance sign the $50 million transfer, and we might let you keep your condo in Aspen. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent the downloaded client list to Agent Miller with a 3-word subject line: the guest list. I spent the rest of the night in a state of hyper-focus. I drafted a global press release timed for 8 a.m. Monday. I contacted my counterparts in London to ensure the Sterling Thorne consulting contract was officially terminated, and the news leaked to the Financial Times. Around midnight, my mother called. I finally picked up. "Sloan," she said, her voice shaking with a rage so cold it felt brittle. "I am standing in the Bel Air house. It is dark. It is cold. Your sister is sleeping on a sofa at a friend's house. Do you have any idea the shame you have brought upon us? Your father is with the lawyers now. He is going to strip you of everything. He is going to make sure you are blacklisted from every board in this country." "Mother," I said, standing by the hotel window, watching the neon pulse of Times Square. "Did you know Dad forged my signature? Did you know he risked my entire life to pay for Jax's mistresses and bad bets? He did what he had to do to protect the family," she screamed. "Family comes first." "Sloan." "Always. No," I said quietly. "Family comes last for you. Appearance comes first. Power comes first. I was just the engine that kept the car running. Well, the engine has been removed, Mother. I hope you enjoy the walk." I hung up and turned off the phone. The silence of the hotel room was beautiful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying the weight of the Sterlings. I was a weapon in flight, and I was aimed directly at the heart of the kingdom. Tomorrow was Sunday, a day of rest for some. For me, it was the final calibration. Monday morning, the world would see the socialite and the great statesman for what they really were: a collection of empty suits and stolen dreams. I lay down on the bed, not to sleep, but to wait for the sun. The cost of the crown was high, but I was finally ready to pay it in full with their blood, their names, and their freedom. Sunday morning in Manhattan usually carries a certain stillness, but for me, it was the eye of a hurricane. I sat in the hushed, cavernous library of an exclusive members-only club, where I knew no Sterling would ever dare show their face, mostly because they owed the club 6 figures in unpaid dues. Before me sat Leo Vance and a team of forensic accountants I'd hired at an emergency rate of $2,000 an hour. They had been awake all night, digging through the digital entrails of Apex Horizon and the Sterling family's private ledgers. Sloane, it's a bloodbath, Leo said, tossing a tablet onto the table. Your father didn't just use the $100 million credit line to cover Jax's oil debt. He used it to fund a shadow lifestyle for the entire family. Look at these line items. I scrolled through the ledger. My heart, which I thought had already turned to stone, grew even colder. $1.2 million for a legacy donation to ensure Skylar's cosmetic brand was featured in Vogue. $4 million to pay off a private investigator Sterling hired to dig up dirt on his political rivals. $800,000 for a custom-built wine cellar in the Hamptons, billed as security upgrades. He wasn't just bridging a gap, Sloane, Leo whispered. He was liquidating your future to buy their present. But here's the kicker, Jax didn't just lose $50 million in oil. He funneled $15 million of your stolen money into a cryptocurrency wallet that's currently being tracked by the Treasury Department for money laundering. So they aren't just thieves, I said, my voice as sharp as a razor. They're amateurs. They thought they could hide a digital trail in a world where I own the satellites. The clock is ticking, Leo warned. Sterling's lawyers filed a petition for emergency guardianship 2 hours ago. They're claiming you've suffered a psychotic break and are trying to freeze your access to Black Standard's primary servers before the board meeting tomorrow. They're using Skylar's social media meltdown as Exhibit A of your erratic behavior. Let them, I said. Every lie they file is another nail in their coffin. Are we ready for the 10 a.m.? Exactly at 10, the screen in the private room flickered to life. 3 faces appeared: the chairman of the board in London, the lead director of Black Standard, and the head of our global compliance. For the next 60 minutes, I performed the most important earnings call of my life. I didn't hide anything. I laid out the fraud, the forgery, and the fact that I had already self-reported to the SEC. I am the CEO, I told the board, my gaze unwavering. And as CEO, I have a fiduciary duty to protect this firm from all threats, including my own blood. I am placing my personal shares in a blind trust and resigning as CEO, effective immediately. But I am staying on as a consultant to assist the federal authorities in the seizure of the assets stolen from this firm's leadership. The chairman looked stunned. Sloane, you're destroying your career. If this goes public, the Sterling name will be radioactive. The Sterling name is already dead, I replied. I'm just here to perform the autopsy. By 2 p.m., I was back at the hotel, watching the final act of Skylar's public tragedy play out on my laptop. She had reached the manic stage of her social media campaign. She was now live-streaming from the back seat of a car, screaming at the camera about how the elite, meaning me, were trying to silence her. She's working with the feds to frame my husband, Skylar shrieked to her followers. Sloane Thorne is a traitor. She's jealous of my brand, jealous of my marriage. Dad is going to make it right. We're going to the penthouse right now to reclaim what's ours. I checked the security feed from my penthouse. Sure enough, a black SUV had pulled into the basement garage. My father, Sterling, and Skylar stepped out. Sterling looked composed, his statesman mask firmly in place, but I could see the tremor in his hands. They walked to the elevator. Sterling swiped a keycard, my old emergency spare. The elevator didn't move. Instead, a screen inside the elevator illuminated. I hit the talk button on my laptop. Hello, Sterling. Hello, Skylar. My voice echoed in the small mirrored space. Skylar jumped, looking around wildly. Sloane. You bitch. Open this elevator. We have a court order. You have a forged petition signed by a judge who's currently being fitted for an ankle monitor, I said calmly. Sterling, look at the camera. My father looked up. his eyes narrow slits of hatred. Sloane, don't be a fool. I've already authorized the transfer of the penthouse deed. It's over. Your homeless daughter, just like you tried to make your sister. Actually, Sterling, I sold the penthouse 4 hours ago. I lied well, partially. I had transferred the deed to a holding company owned by the very shadow lender they had used, effectively returning the stolen collateral to satisfy the debt and leaving them with nothing to claim. And the people waiting for you at the top aren't movers. They're special agents from the SEC and the FBI. The color drained from Sterling's face. He frantically pressed the G button, but the elevator was locked. You think I'm the one who's trapped? I continued, my voice a whisper of pure, icy satisfaction. I've spent 15 years building a fortress. You spent 40 years building a house of cards. The wind has started blowing, Dad. I cut the feed. I stood up and walked to the window. In the distance, I could hear the faint, rising wail of sirens, the music of my new life beginning. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't see a Sterling. I didn't see a daughter. I saw a survivor. I reached into my bag and pulled out my passport. Inside was my one-way ticket to London, departing at 8 a.m. Monday. But I wasn't leaving as a fugitive. I was leaving as the woman who had liquidated the most toxic asset in her portfolio, her family. The phone on the hotel desk rang. It was the lobby. Miss Thorne? There's a woman here named Eleanor Sterling. She's demanding to see you. She says it's a family emergency. Tell her I don't have a family, I said. And call the police. There's a trespasser in the lobby. I hung up. The audit was complete. The debt was settled. And for the first time in my life, I was finally gloriously in the black. The sirens didn't stop. From my hotel room, they sounded like a choir of consequences echoing through the canyons of Manhattan. On my screen, the grainy security footage from the penthouse elevator showed my father's composure finally fracturing. He wasn't the great statesman anymore. He was a trapped animal in a $1,000 suit, frantically punching buttons that no longer worked. Sloane, he roared at the elevator camera, his voice cracking. You don't understand the scale of this if I go down the names I've protected. The people who fund your world. They'll burn everything you've ever touched. Let it burn, Sterling, I whispered to the empty room. I've already moved my throne to another continent. I closed the laptop. I had no interest in watching his arrest in real time. I had work to do. My phone buzzed. It was a restricted number. Sloane, it's Miller. The SEC agent's voice was clipped, breathless. We've got him. We've also got Jax. He tried to make a run for it at Teterboro Airport. He was boarding a private jet with 2 suitcases full of company records and about $4 million in untraceable luxury watches. We've intercepted the server for Apex Horizon. You were right, it's a ghost ship. And Judge Penhaligon? I asked, my voice steady. He was picked up at his golf club an hour ago. He's already asking for a deal. He's terrified, Sloane. He's offering up your father's entire political ledger in exchange for a reduced sentence. Good. Make sure he knows Sterling was planning to pin the whole thing on him. I added a cold, calculated lie to ensure the judge's cooperation. The guardianship petition was Sterling's way of making the judge the fall guy for the mentally unstable daughter's missing millions. You're cold, Thorne, Miller said, with a hint of begrudging respect. I'll call you when the arraignment is set. I hung up and checked the time, 11:30 p.m., the final hours of the Sterling dynasty. Just then, my hotel room door shook, a heavy rhythmic pounding. It wasn't the polite knock of room service. Sloane. Open this door, I know you're in there. It was Eleanor. I debated ignoring her, letting the hotel security handle the nuisance. But I realized I wanted this. I wanted to see the look on her face when she realized the grande dame was now the wife of a federal inmate. I opened the door. My mother looked like a ghost of her former self. Her Chanel suit was wrinkled. Her hair, usually a rigid helmet of perfection, was beginning to fray. But it was her eyes that held the most venom. They weren't filled with grief. They were filled with the rage of a woman whose social standing had been stripped away. "You've done it," she hissed, pushing past me into the room. "You've destroyed 40 years of work in 48 hours. Do you have any idea what they're saying on the news? The Sterling name is being dragged through the mud alongside some Ponzi scheme." "It isn't alongside the scheme, Mother. The Sterling name is the scheme," I said, leaning against the desk. "Dad didn't just borrow money. He stole it. From me. From his friends. From the state. He was protecting us," she screamed, her voice echoing off the luxury wallpaper. "He was protecting Skylar. She was going to lose her brand. She was going to be humiliated." "And what about me?" I asked, my voice dropping to a dangerous low vibrato. "I was going to lose my career, my freedom, my sanity. Did that cross your mind when you were helping him backdate those documents?" Eleanor flinched. The silence that followed confirmed what I had always suspected: she wasn't an innocent bystander. She was the architect of the family's moral decay. "I didn't help him," she stammered, her eyes darting around the room. I ensured the records were kept in order. In the legal world, Mother, that's called being an accessory after the fact. At best, it's misprision of a felony." I walked toward her, and for the first time in my life, she was the one who retreated. "I've turned over the Hamptons security logs. I know you were in the room when Penhaligon signed that forged POA. I know you saw the ledger." Eleanor's face went white. "You wouldn't. I'm your mother, Sloane." "You're a Sterling," I corrected. "And as you so eloquently put it yesterday, a Sterling always takes care of their own." "Well, I'm taking care of myself. There's a car waiting downstairs to take you back to the Hamptons. Enjoy it tonight because the FBI will be there at 6 a.m. to seize the property as a proceed of crime." "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice breaking. "A cold, heartless monster. No, Mother. I'm the audit you didn't see coming." I opened the door and gestured for her to leave. She stood there for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a landed fish, before she gathered what was left of her pride and swept out into the hallway. I shut the door and bolted it. I sat back down at the computer. One final task. I opened the Black Standard internal portal. I had 1 hour before my resignation became final, and my access was revoked. I navigated to the Sterling Strategic Consulting contract. With a few keystrokes, I initiated a clawback provision. Because the contract was predicated on ethical representation, and my father was now under federal indictment, the firm was legally entitled to reclaim every cent paid to him over the last 5 years. $12 million. I clicked execute. The money wouldn't go to me. It would go into a victims' restitution fund for the people Jax had defrauded. It was the final total liquidation of the Sterling coffers. At 2 a.m., the news broke on the Wall Street Journal digital edition. Titan of DC strategy arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud. Daughter exposes forgery. The photo accompanying the article was of me, not the crying, broken daughter they expected, but the CEO. The caption called me a whistleblower of unprecedented proportions. I checked my email. A single message from an anonymous account. No subject, just an attachment. It was a photo of Skylar's socialite Instagram page. It had been deactivated. The brand was gone. The followers had vanished like smoke. I closed my eyes and finally, for the first time in years, I felt my muscles relax. The crown was gone. The kingdom was in ashes. But I was still standing. I checked my watch. 4 hours until my flight to London. I didn't need to pack. I had everything I needed in my briefcase, my passport, my new contract, and the absolute. terrifying freedom of a woman who had nothing left to lose and an entire world to gain. I walked to the window and watched the first hint of grey light hit the East River. Monday morning, I whispered. Let's see what else I can build. The sunrise over JFK International Airport was a streak of violent orange cutting through the smog of a city that had tried to consume me. I sat in the hushed sanctuary of the first-class lounge, a cup of black coffee in my hand and a burner phone on the table. My primary device was already at the bottom of the Hudson River. I didn't want a single digital ghost following me to London. The television in the corner was muted, but the headlines were screaming. Sterling fallout judge Penhaligon resigns Jackson in federal custody. Beneath the text was a grainy shot of Jax being led into a courthouse with a suit jacket draped over his handcuffed wrists. He looked small. Without my money to inflate his ego, he was just a mediocre man in an expensive cage. My burner phone vibrated. A text from Leo Vance. The Hamptons raid was a success. Your mother tried to bar the door, but the feds have the ledger. She's currently being detained for questioning at the local precinct. Your father's legal team is already filing for a change of venue, claiming toxic pre-trial publicity. It won't work. The SEC is making an example of him. You're clear for takeoff, Sloan. The Atlantic is your moat now. I didn't reply. I powered down the phone, removed the SIM card, and dropped it into a trash bin as I walked toward Gate A12. The flight was a 7-hour vacuum of luxury and silence. I spent it watching the clouds, refusing to look at the onboard news. I was no longer Sloan Thorne, the Sterling fixer. I was Sloan Thorne, the architect. When the wheels touched down at Heathrow, the cool, damp air of London felt like a baptism. I was met at the gate by a driver holding a discreet sign, Vance and Associates. Leo had pre-arranged everything, a penthouse in Mayfair, a new security detail, and a legal wall that would make the Sterling lawyers look like children playing with blocks. As we drove toward the city, my new assistant, a sharp British woman named Claire, handed me a tablet. "Welcome to London, Ms. Thorne," she said, her voice a soothing clip. "The board of directors has called an emergency session for tomorrow morning. They've seen the news from New York. They aren't worried about the scandal. They're impressed by the efficiency of your restructuring." Efficiency is just another word for survival, Claire, I said, scrolling through the board's briefing. "What's the status of the US assets?" "The liquidation of the Sterling estate is moving faster than expected," she reported. "Because the fraud was so blatant, the courts are fast-tracking the asset seizures to satisfy the creditors. Your sister, Skylar, has officially filed for bankruptcy. She's currently staying at a motel in New Jersey. She tried to sell her story to 3 different tabloids this morning, but your legal team blocked the releases based on the non-disclosure agreements she signed 3 years ago in exchange for her marketing funds." I felt a ghost of a smile touch my lips. I had forgotten I'd tucked those NDAs away. Skylar's only currency was her voice, and I had effectively silenced her with her own greed. And my father? "He called the Mayfair office 6 times this afternoon," Claire said, looking a bit uncomfortable. "He's demanding to speak with you. He says he has critical information regarding your mother's involvement that could clear your conscience." Shimchach. I laughed, a cold, dry sound that startled Claire. "He's trying to sell out his wife to save himself. It's a classic Sterling move. Block the number. If he wants to talk, he can do it through a glass partition at Rikers Island." We pulled up to the Mayfair penthouse. It was a masterpiece of stone and glass, overlooking the green expanse of Hyde Park. It was a world away from the gilded cage of Manhattan. I walked onto the balcony, the London wind whipping my hair. The city felt old, permanent, and indifferent to the petty dramas of a fallen American dynasty. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for a text demanding a bailout. I wasn't waiting for a crisis to manage. I was simply Sloan. I opened my laptop and logged into a private server I had established months ago, long before the war started. It contained a single file, Project Phoenix. Inside were the blueprints for my new venture. I wasn't just going to lead a board. I was going to launch my own private equity firm, one that specialized in distressed legacy assets. I was going to buy the ruins of families like mine and rebuild them into something profitable, something clean. I looked at the clock. 7 p.m. in London, 2 p.m. in New York. At that exact moment, I knew the evening news in the States would be airing the footage of my father's first appearance before a judge. He would be looking for me in the gallery. He would be looking for the daughter who always fixed everything. But I wasn't there. I was 3,000 miles away, drinking a glass of vintage Bordeaux and watching the lights of London flicker to life. My phone chimed. A new email from an unknown sender. Subject Legacy. I opened it. It was a photo of the Hamptons estate. The front gates were draped in yellow police tape. The sterling nameplate, the one my father had spent 30 years polishing, had been ripped off the stone pillar, leaving only a jagged, ugly scar in the rock. I deleted the email. I walked back inside, closing the glass doors on the past. The cost of the crown had been high. My family, my home, my reputation in New York. But as I looked at the Phoenix files on my screen, I realized the trade was worth it. I had lost a kingdom of lies. I was about to build an empire of truth. Monday morning was coming. And this time, I wasn't just ready for the war. I was the one writing the terms of the peace. The Sterling era was over. The Thorn era had just begun. Monday morning in London didn't scream, it hummed. The city moved with a quiet, lethal precision that suited my new headspace. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my Mayfair suite, fastening a pair of diamond studs, the only pieces of jewelry I'd kept from my life in New York. Everything else, the heirlooms, the gifts from my father, had been left in a vault for the feds to catalogue. I was wearing a charcoal grey power suit by a British designer, sharper, more architectural than the softer lines I wore in Manhattan. I wasn't trying to fit in. I was trying to signal that the woman who had arrived was not the victim the tabloids were currently painting. "The car is downstairs, Ms. Thorne," Claire said, entering with a sleek leather portfolio. "The board of directors is already assembled at the Shard. The atmosphere is expectant." Expectant. That's a polite way of saying they're waiting to see if I'm radioactive, I replied, grabbing my briefcase. "Actually," Claire said with a faint, knowing smile, "the London markets opened an hour ago. When the news broke that you'd successfully clawed back 12 million from the Sterling consulting contract, the conglomerate's stock ticked up 2%. They don't see you as radioactive. They see you as a surgeon who just removed a tumour." The Shard loomed over the Thames like a shard of ice. As we ascended to the top-floor boardroom, the pressure in my ears shifted, a physical reminder of the heights I was still climbing. I walked into the boardroom at exactly 9 a.m. 12 men and women in bespoke suits stopped talking. These were the titans of European industry people who didn't care about my father's political connections, only about the bottom line and the stability of the chair. Lord Harrington, the chairman, stood up. He was 80, with white hair and eyes like flint. "Sloane, we've been watching the news from New York. A rather dramatic exit." "The most effective exits usually are, my lord," I said, taking my seat at the head of the long obsidian table. "There are concerns," a woman named Beatrice, the head of risk management, interjected. "Your father is threatening a countersuit for defamation. Your mother is claiming coercion. If this drags on, it could distract from our Q4 expansion." I opened my portfolio and slid a single sheet of paper toward her. It was a summary of the Phoenix restructuring plan. My father is currently in a federal holding cell. His legal team consists of a court-appointed attorney because his primary counsel withdrew the moment the fraud charges were upgraded to racketeering. I said, my voice projecting a calm, absolute authority. There will be no countersuit because there is no money left to fund one. As for my mother, she is an accessory by the end of the week. She'll be more concerned with her own indictment than with defamation. I leaned forward, my gaze sweeping the room. You didn't hire me because of my family name. You hired me because I know how to manage risk. The sterling risk has been neutralized. What I'm proposing now is that we take the 12 million I recovered and use it to seed a new investigative unit within this firm. We aren't just going to manage assets. We're going to audit our partners before the feds do. We become the gold standard of transparency. The room was silent. I could see the gears turning. I wasn't just defending my position, I was expanding it. And what of your sister? Harrington asked. The girl's social media presence is loud. My sister is a brand without a product, I said. She has 48 hours before her remaining sponsors invoke the morality clause in her contracts. I've already provided their legal teams with the documentation of her husband's money laundering. She isn't a threat. She's a cautionary tale. By 11 a.m., the board hadn't just confirmed my appointment. They had granted me extraordinary executive powers to oversee the global restructuring. I walked out of the Shard not as a survivor, but as a conqueror. But the day wasn't over. Back at the Mayfair office, Claire met me with a grim expression. You have a visitor. He's been waiting in the lobby for an hour. He says he's an old friend from the shadow side of the sterling business. My heart skipped a beat, but my face remained a mask. Did he give a name? Arthur Penhaligon's son, Julian. I felt a surge of cold fury. Julian Penhaligon, the son of the judge who had forged the documents. Julian and I had grown up together, summered in the Hamptons, attended the same Ivy League mixers. He was a junior partner at a white shoe firm in D.C., and he was just as dirty as his father. Send him up, I said. And Claire recorded everything. Julian walked in 5 minutes later. He looked disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. He didn't look like a high-powered attorney. He looked like a man who had been running for days. Sloane, he breathed, stopping at the door. You have to stop this. My father is 70 years old. He won't survive a federal prison. He only did it because Sterling promised him a seat on the appellate court. He did it because he's a criminal, Julian, I said, not rising from my desk. Just like your father, just like mine. We can fix this, Julian said, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. I have the secondary ledger, the one Sterling kept in the safe in the Hamptons. It has names Sloane, names of people in the Senate, people on the Treasury Board. If you help me get my father a compassionate release, I'll give you the ledger. You could rule D.C. with what's in there. I looked at him, this man who thought he could still trade in the currency of secrets and lies. He thought I wanted power. He didn't realize I wanted peace. You're late, Julian, I said. What? The FBI recovered that ledger 4 hours ago. I lied. I didn't know if they had it yet, but I knew it was only a matter of time. And I don't want to rule D.C. I want D.C. to forget I ever existed. Julian's face crumpled. He realized the leverage he thought he had was smoke. You're really going to let them all rot, aren't you? He asked, a note of genuine horror in his voice. Your own father, my father, everyone we grew up with. They didn't just rot, Julian. They decayed from the inside out. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see the maggots. I stood up. Get out of my office if I see you again. I'll tell Miller you tried to bribe me with a stolen ledger. After he left, I stood by the window watching the rain start to fall over London. My phone chimed. A notification from a New York news app. Sterling Thorne formally arraigned, bail denied due to flight risk. There was a photo. My father in a navy jumpsuit looking old and broken. For a split second I felt a pang of something not regret, but a ghostly remnant of the girl who used to think her father was a god. Then I looked at the Phoenix files on my desk. I looked at the London skyline. I picked up the phone and called Leo Vance. "Leo," I said. "It's done. The board is on side. Julian Penhaligon just tried to flip. The collapse is total." "And you, Sloane?" Leo asked. "How are you?" I looked at my reflection in the glass. The charcoal suit, the diamond studs. The eyes that no longer looked for approval. "I'm in the black, Leo," I said. "For the first time in my life, the books are perfectly balanced." I hung up, closed the laptop, and walked out of the office. The rain was heavy now, washing the London streets clean. I stepped into the back of the car, headed for a dinner with Harrington and the future. The cost of the crown had been everything, but the value of the freedom priceless. The gala at the Victoria and Albert Museum was the kind of event the Sterlings used to dream of: a sea of tuxedos, priceless antiquities, and conversations that moved global markets. But as I moved through the crowd, I wasn't the +1 or the dutiful daughter. I was the guest of honor, the woman who had surgically detached herself from a sinking empire and emerged with her own fleet. Yet, even in the heart of London, the ghosts of New York found a way to bleed through the silence. My phone, now a strictly encrypted device managed by my new security team, vibrated in my clutch. It was a notification from a private investigator I'd hired to monitor the peripheral fallout, a polite term for my sister. I stepped into a quiet alcove near a 16th century tapestry. The link led to a tabloid video titled "Skylar Sterling's Motel Meltdown from Bel Air to the Bronx." The footage was shaky, captured by a predatory paparazzo. It showed Skylar standing in the parking lot of a budget motel, her designer coat stained, screaming at a tow truck driver who was repossessing her last remaining asset, the lime green Lamborghini. "Do you know who I am?" she shrieked, her voice cracking in the cold New York air. "My sister is Sloane Thorne. She's worth hundreds of millions." "This is a mistake. Call her, tell her Skylar needs her." The driver didn't even look up. He just hooked the chains and drove away, leaving her standing in the rain, surrounded by 3 suitcases of clothes she no longer had a closet for. I closed the video. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but I hesitated. There was no triumph in seeing her like that. There was only the cold, hard reality of the math. Skylar had spent 10 years building a life out of sand, and the tide had finally come in. "A tragic performance," a voice said behind me. I turned to see Lord Harrington. He was watching me with a look of clinical interest. "Your sister is trending on Twitter again. Not the kind of brand engagement one hopes for." "She's addicted to the audience, my lord," I said, slipping the phone back into my bag. "Even if the audience is only there to watch the car crash." "And your mother?" Harrington asked, sipping his champagne. "I hear the federal prosecutors have offered her a deal. Testimony against your father in exchange for a suspended sentence and the retention of her personal jewelry." I felt a sharp, bitter tang of irony. Eleanor would sell her soul to keep her pearls. If the feds offered her a way to stay out of a jumpsuit, she'd testify against God himself, let alone Sterling. "It's a brutal business, family," Harrington mused. "But you've handled it with remarkable detachment. The board is impressed. We've finalized the acquisition of the first distressed legacy asset under your Phoenix Fund, a private bank in Luxembourg that was nearly ruined by a family scandal remarkably similar to your own." "Good," I said. "Clean it out. Fire everyone with the last name of the founders." "We start with a blank ledger." As Harrington moved back toward the crowd, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a news alert. It was a call from the Federal Detention Center in New York. A collect call. I stared at the screen. I should have ignored it. I should have blocked the facility. But curiosity, or perhaps a final lingering shred of the girl I used to be, made me answer. "Accept," I whispered. "Sloane." The voice was thin, raspy, and stripped of the booming resonance that had once commanded Senate floors. My father sounded like a man who had aged 20 years in 7 days. "Hello, Sterling," I said, my voice flat. "They won't let me see the sun, Sloane," he said. And for a second he sounded genuinely terrified. "They have me in a unit with people who... they don't know who I am. The lawyers say the SEC is going for the maximum. 30 years. I'm 70, Sloane. That's a death sentence." "You should have thought about the death sentence when you were signing my name to a $100 million fraud, Dad." "I did it for the family," he hissed, the old sparks of rage flickering back to life. "I did it so Skylar wouldn't lose her house. So your mother wouldn't have to sell the Hamptons. I was the one who kept us afloat while you were busy playing CEO." "You weren't keeping us afloat," I countered. "You were holding our heads under water so you could stand on our shoulders. You stole my life to pay for a lie. And the worst part, Sterling, you aren't even sorry. You're just sorry you got caught. Listen to me," he pleaded, his voice dropping to a frantic whisper. "I have a safety deposit box. Zurich. Under a shell name you don't know. There's 40 million in bearer bonds. It's enough to get me a better legal team. Maybe buy some influence with the prosecutors. I'll give you half. Just get me out of here. Get the guardianship papers pushed through. Tell them you had a lapse in memory. Tell them you authorized the POA." I felt a wave of cold, crystalline clarity. Even now, in a cage, he was trying to bribe me with more stolen money. He was trying to make me a co-conspirator in my own destruction. "The box in Zurich?" I asked. "Yes, I'll give you the code. Just help me." "I'll pass the information along to Agent Miller at the SEC, I said. "I'm sure the Victims Fund will appreciate the $40 million contribution." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could almost hear the moment his last hope evaporated. You really are heartless," he whispered. "I raised a monster. No, Sterling," I said, looking at my reflection in a 17th century mirror. The charcoal suit, the diamond studs, the eyes that felt nothing. "You raised a Sterling. I just learned the lesson better than you did." I hung up. I walked back into the gala, the music of the string quartet swelling around me. I accepted a fresh glass of wine from a passing waiter and joined a circle of German bankers discussing the future of the euro. But as I talked, my mind was 3,000 miles away, in a motel parking lot in the Bronx. I thought about Skylar standing in the rain. I thought about my mother trading her husband for her jewelry. And I thought about my father sitting in the dark, realizing the only daughter who could save him was the one he had tried to destroy. The cost of the crown was total. My family was scattered to the winds, one in jail, one in hiding, one selling her soul. I was the only one left standing, and as I looked around the room at the most powerful people in London, I realized that I wasn't just in the black. I was the house, and the house always wins. I checked my watch, 11 p.m. Tomorrow I had a 7 a.m. meeting to finalize the takeover of the Luxembourg Bank. I drained my glass and signaled for my driver. The war was over, but the empire was just beginning. And as I stepped out into the crisp London night, I didn't feel like a monster. I felt like a woman who had finally, for the first time in her life, balanced the books. The Sterling name was a scar, but the Thorn name, that was going to be a legend. The corner office of Thorn Global in Mayfair did not feature family photos. There were no silver-framed memories of Hampton summers or gala smiles. Instead, the walls were adorned with minimalist architectural sketches, clean lines, structural integrity, and reinforced foundations. It was 6 months since I had touched down at Heathrow. In that time, the American news cycle had moved on, as it always does, devouring new scandals. But for the Sterlings, the clock had simply stopped. I sat at my desk, watching the fog roll off the Thames when Claire entered. She didn't carry a tablet this time. She carried a single physical envelope, postmarked from a federal correctional facility in New York. It arrived in the morning mail. Sloan, Claire said, her voice soft. It's from your father's legal counsel. The sentencing was finalized this morning. I took the envelope. My hands didn't shake. I had reached a level of emotional stasis that was almost meditative. I opened the heavy vellum and read the dry legal prose. Sterling Thorne, 25 years. No possibility of parole until 85% of the sentence was served. At 70, it was as he had feared, a biological life sentence. Beneath the formal notice was a handwritten note from his attorney. Your father refused to sign the final asset forfeiture documents until he was told you had received this. He asked me to tell you that the Thorne name is built on a stolen foundation. He says he'll see you in hell. I set the paper down. I've been living in his version of hell for 15 years, Claire. This is just the relocation of the furnace. And your mother? Claire asked. Eleanor is living in a 2-bedroom apartment in New Jersey funded by the sale of her remaining untainted jewelry, I said, reciting the report my investigators had sent an hour earlier. She's reportedly writing a memoir. She's calling it The Silent Sterling. She's trying to sell the film rights to Netflix. Even in the gutter, she's looking for a spotlight. And Skylar, I paused. This was the only part of the ledger that still felt like a rounding error I couldn't quite close. Skylar is working as a brand consultant for a low-tier influencer agency in Secaucus. She's living in a studio. She sent me an email yesterday. No demands for money. Just a photo of a sandwich she bought with her own paycheck. Did you reply? No, I said, looking out at the London skyline. Silence is the only language they understand now. If I speak to them, I give them a bridge back into my world. And that bridge was demolished the moment the feds entered the Hamptons. My phone chimed with a high-priority alert. It was the closing notification for the Luxembourg acquisition. The Phoenix Fund had officially absorbed its first billion-dollar asset. The Sterling scandal was now a Harvard Business School case study on how to survive a reputational nuclear strike. Lord Harrington and the board are waiting in the conference room, Claire reminded me. They want to toast to the new era. Tell them I'll be there in 5 minutes. When Claire left, I walked over to the small, discreet wall safe behind my desk. I dialed the combination and pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't my father's secret book of bribes. It was my own. In it, I had kept a meticulous record of every dollar I had given the family over the last decade. The bailouts, the jet fuel, the hush money, the cosmetic launches. Total $142,650,000. I picked up a pen and drew a single, thick, black line through the total. Beneath it, I wrote, "Paid in full." I didn't feel a surge of joy. I didn't feel the catharsis that psychologists talk about in Sunday supplements. What I felt was the quiet, terrifying power of a vacuum. I had removed the parasites, and in their place was a vast open space where my life was supposed to be. I realized then that my father was right about one thing: the foundation was stolen. My identity had been so intertwined with fixing their failures that I had forgotten who the architect was. I grabbed my coat, a deep navy wool that felt like armor, and headed toward the boardroom. As I walked through the halls of Thorne Global, my employees lowered their voices. They didn't look at me with the pity they gave to victims. They looked at me with the wary respect reserved for someone who had looked into the abyss and told it to lower its tone. I entered the boardroom. Lord Harrington stood at the head of the table, a bottle of 1945 Krug cooling in a silver bucket. "To Sloane Thorne," Harrington said, raising his glass. "The woman who proved that blood may be thicker than water, but gold is harder than both." The board members toasted their eyes, reflecting the city lights. I took a sip of the champagne. It was cold, crisp, and slightly bitter, exactly like the freedom I had bought. "So, Sloane," Harrington said, leaning in, "now that the Sterling ghost is buried, what's the next move? Where does the phoenix fly?" I looked around the room. I saw the power, the greed, and the ambition that mirrored the very world I had just escaped. But there was a difference. This time I was the one holding the leash. This time I wasn't the strong one who supported the family. I was the power that sustained the system. "The next move is a total audit of our DC counterparts," I said, my voice echoing with a new terrifying clarity. "We've seen what happens when legacies are left to rot in the dark. We're going to buy the light, my lord. We're going to buy the transparency." The meeting lasted until midnight. When I finally returned to my penthouse, the fog had completely swallowed the city. I stood on my balcony, the damp air clinging to my skin. For a brief second, I thought I heard the phantom ring of my old phone, the one Skylar used to blow up with emergencies. I thought I heard my father's booming laugh from a Hamptons patio that no longer belonged to us. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the physical notice of my father's 25-year sentence. I didn't save it. I didn't frame it. I tore it into a dozen small pieces and let the London wind take them. They fluttered down like grey snow, disappearing into the dark maw of the city. I went back inside and locked the glass doors. I turned off the lights, leaving the room in total perfect darkness. In the silence there were no demands. There were no debts. There were no Sterlings. There was only Sloane Thorne. The cost of the crown was everything I used to be. But as I closed my eyes and finally drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, I realized it was the best bargain I had ever made. The books were closed, the audit was over, I was finally truly out of the red.